Nerdrotic.com.
Poor Disney Marvel, they've had a rough couple of years, an entire phase of storytelling and financial failures in the theaters, one turd after the other on D+, taking the once mighty Marvel Universe and homogenizing it down to intersectional gobbledygook, leading to millions of lost subscribers on D+, leading to billions lost on streaming, and leading to a couple of lost executives.
You're fired.
All while either bringing back or keeping the architects of their failure. Let's just say Disney Marvel needs a win in a big way. Was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 that win? No. Was it a bad film? No. I would argue it actually makes things worse as it concerns the big picture that we'll get into. So join me, you over 740,000 beautiful members of the Fellowship and the 40% who haven't subscribed yet. Let's take a look at how a giant subsidiary of a giant mega corporation learns the lesson of too little, too late. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a sequel to a film that came out 6 years ago, a time before the MCU, and within that 6 years, James Gunn was fired for past tweets. Then he went off to work for DC, making The Suicide Squad and The Peacemaker. Time passed, and he was shown forgiveness that Gina Carano and Roseanne Barr wasn't by being rehired by Disney. While back with Disney Marvel, he makes Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and then immediately off to go run DC. And one of his first acts is to get rid of Henry Cavill as Superman.
Why, you stupid bastard?
This brings us to the mixed bag that is Guardians 3, a film that I liked, but a lot of it felt obligatory, and we can't ignore its opening domestic box office weekend of $118 million. That is $28 million behind its predecessor, Guardians 2, which again came out 6 years ago. Yet that isn't the fault of this movie, and it has everything to do with the damage that Disney Marvel has done to their own brand. So the last time we left our Guardians, Gamora is dead, and she's replaced by another Gamora from an earlier timeline. Is she a variant? Don't know. Thor is no longer a member of the team because he had to go out and find himself for the 8th time. And Mantis is Peter Quill's sister, and you would only know that if you watch the Christmas special. Again, if you watch the Christmas special, you'd know the Guardians have taken over the residency of Nowhere from the Collector. And we start out the film with some very sad Guardians with all of these unresolved issues. Peter's sad because he misses Gamora, so he's an alcoholic now. Nebula's angry. Rocket's sad, and the rest are sad because Peter's sad. Now, all of these very likable characters have very good reasons to feel down. I just feel it would have had a lot more impact if, say, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 came out when it was supposed to. But they don't waste a lot of time on that in the opening because Rocket is severely injured when the team is attacked out of nowhere, basically, by Disney's Adam Warlock, the single most useless and vandalized character in this movie, and we will get to that. While attempting to save Rocket, Nebula finds out that he essentially has 48 hours to live because a kill switch has been put into his body to protect the proprietary information. We also find out that Adam Warlock was sent to retrieve Rocket for our villain, the High Evolutionary. Speaking of the High Evolutionary, a villain I actually liked, I want to take this moment in time to give Disney Marvel a compliment. Give them a little shout out because they've tried so hard to be more diverse and inclusive, and well, they did a bang up job with the first two bad guys in Phase 5.
Diversity is an old wooden ship that was used during the Civil War era.
Guess the only real spoilers would be with what happens to our characters, but as far as the plot is concerned, well, it's really not there. Once the Guardians figure out that Rocket is indeed proprietary technology, they also find out that there's a passcode that can override the kill switch within 48 hours, and that's what they set off to do, and it becomes basically a MacGuffin chase. All while sprinkling in bits of Rocket's origin, which are the best parts of this movie, and getting every single character resolved before the end. We'll start with the good, and that would be Rocket. Now, we all assumed he was experimented on by some megalomaniac mad scientist, and he was. There's no surprise there, but we got to see how excruciating it really was, torturing and mutilating little fake CG animals. It helped develop Rocket's character, develop his motivation, and it showed us a villain actually being evil. Not relatable or misunderstood, just bad. Hats off to James Gunn. If he is remembered for anything, he took a CGI raccoon and not only made him popular, he made him believable and most importantly, relatable. But according to modern Hollywood, this should be impossible. Aside from the fact that Rocket is not played by an actual raccoon, I share no lived experience with a raccoon, but at least raccoons can feel seen as their true selves now. The other character I really liked, Chris Pratt's Peter Quill, and who can say anything bad about this guy, aside from a few dimwits on Twitter? He's currently in the top 2 films in the country. I mean, sure, he's angry most of the film, but Chris Pratt can pull that off because he was born with something a lot of actors don't have: charisma and charm. And yes, it's another Marvel character basically dealing with grief and loss, but I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying this film dealt with it a lot better than, say, they dealt with Wanda Maximoff in WandaVision and Doctor Strange Mom. All things considered, despite it being pretty cruel, I think Peter Quill handled being forced to work with another version of Gamora pretty well. Not too sure how I'd feel about being forced to work with a more unlikable version of my ex. And I know she definitely wouldn't want to work with me. Then there's Nebula, who just so happens to be one of my favorite characters from the once good MCU, played brilliantly to perfection by Karen Gillan, despite being yet another Disney Marvel character trying to find themselves in the world. I mean, there's a lot of that in this movie. As a matter of fact, I think that's every single character. And another standout for me with a slight asterisk is the High Evolutionary, finally a proper villain. A man with a plan. He wants to create the perfect being in the perfect society. There is no way I'm going to try to pronounce the actor's name who plays the High Evolutionary, but he is 1,000 times better than Jonathan Majors Kang. Now, don't get me wrong, his performance is no Heath Ledger Joker, but at least we get a decent villain. Now, I know Kang has destroyed entire timelines, but the only way we know that is either being told or we see strands of energy colliding. The High Evolutionary creates Counter-Earth, populates it with mostly good beings, and then we see him destroy it. And he's done this 1,000 times, and he threatens to destroy the Sovereign, which he sees as his right as their creator. And that's along with torturing and mutilating cute little furry CG animals. And he has one of the better lines in the film: "There is no God, that's why I stepped in." And this is just more proof that Guardians of the Galaxy is just a holdover from better days, but maybe it's not too late to switch Kang with the High Evolutionary. But Disney Marvel would just f*** it up. The rest of the characters were good. Drax was funny. A lot of his humor landed, unlike a lot of other characters. Still, I wish we would have gotten a lot more out of Drax other than just being comic relief. He did finally get that resolution that was set up in the first film at the very end of this one. Mantis was fine. She wasn't terrible. She wasn't great. And yes, they made her Peter's sister and only mentioned it in passing twice. Kraglin, played by James Gunn's brother Sean Gunn, spent most of the movie trying to figure out how to use Yondu's arrow, and Groot was okay, but looked weird and off. And Cosmo's a good dog. Then there's Zoe Saldana's Gamora, who I'm a little conflicted about. She was competent in the film, but it felt obligatory. She wasn't terrible. She didn't take away from the movie. I'm just not too sure how much she actually added to it. Thinking about how much time they had to squeeze so much in this film, I think an argument could be made that it might have been better if she wasn't in it at all. Something to think about. This brings us to the worst character in this film, and again, the most vandalized: Adam Warlock. Now, I know most normies aren't going to care, but I do, because I actually read the source material and know that Adam Warlock is the second most important character in the Infinity Saga. Introducing Adam Warlock into the Marvel Cinematic Universe now is like introducing Aragorn after they toss the ring into the depths of Mount Doom. And while there isn't any real identity politics or general Disney wokeness in this, there is a little side of intersectional feminism when it comes to Adam Warlock. They essentially took this Marvel OG and badass and turned him into another himbo that's on top of the himbo we already have with Drax. I think with Adam Warlock, it's part of a much bigger problem that not only exemplifies, it exposes the overall woke intersectional feminist identity politics philosophy at Disney. How can I say that? Well, why in the hell would you make a himbo and comic relief out of a character that you could have centered an entire film trilogy around with the Infinity Watch? And instead, we've been introduced to characters like America Chavez, Ironheart, Echo, Agatha Harkness and Miss Marvel. Like I said, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a mixed bag. There is some great character work surrounded by an oversimplified plot, MacGuffin chasing, hyperkinetic action scenes that are interrupted by flashbacks, which are the best part of the movie. When the Guardians break into Orgo Corp, which is essentially that giant butthole and colon in space, it's essentially used to waste time and give us some more of that trademark Disney Marvel humor. Sure, there's some cool cameos, the girl who played Ratcatcher in the Suicide Squad, Nathan Fillion, and of course James Gunn's wife. But this raid was just to get a MacGuffin ball of information to give you some background on Rocket and to tell them where to find the override code for his kill switch. I feel like that could have been wrapped up a little faster, but the biggest ball James Gunn dropped was with the destruction of Counter-Earth. Remember in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 when the Infinity Stone wipes out the Collector's lair and we get to see how much power it actually has and it genuinely freaks everyone out and they give you time to think about it? In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the High Evolutionary destroys his own creation, a fully populated planet, and it barely gets a mention. It's just on to the next thing, and that is the biggest fault of Guardians 3. It's a bit self-indulgent. It also had a lot of fake out deaths for the trailer, including Rocket, Drax, and Peter when he's floating out in space, and it makes you think, where in the hell is that mask? Well, it turns out James Gunn did respond to that question on Twitter. He left it in his desk in nowhere. Still, somehow, it worked for me, and that's a testament to likable characters and good character work. It's long and has an even longer ending because they have to wrap up every possible character they can, including Nebula becoming the mayor of nowhere, Drax becoming the father of the kids they had to save from the High Evolutionary, Peter goes back to Earth after accepting that his Gamora is dead to go see his grandpa, Mantis, who's Peter Quill's sister, decides to take on her own with 3 monsters because reasons. I'm sorry, there really was a reason, but it's not the one you're going to want to hear. She has to go find herself. Gamora goes back to Starhawk, played by Sylvester Stallone and the Ravagers, and Rocket is the leader of the new Guardians of the Galaxy that includes Groot, Kraglin, Warlock, and who I believe is Phyla Vell, the female Quasar. Now, James Gunn knows his comic books, and there is a lot of Easter eggs in this film, and a lot of the Guardian stuff that he does comes from a story called Annihilation, something I highly recommend you read even over seeing this movie. But did James Gunn leave any parting messages for Disney Marvel? Well, there might be a couple. Actually, it's just one. I just like to believe there was 2. When Adam Warlock is saved after trying to kill the Guardians throughout the entire movie, he asks why, and Drax translates Groot saying everyone deserves a second chance. The other thing that I'd very much like to believe is a message from James Gunn to Disney Marvel, but I know it isn't, although in my headcanon, it will stay that way. The High Evolutionary's quest to get Rocket is he is the only thing he's ever created, the only proprietary tech that he's made that is capable of creativity and imagination. And he desperately needs Rocket back to make his next batch of beings.
Really, the thing that drives me, that's important to being a filmmaker, is a sense of creativity and play. And you can start to get distracted by results, by adulation or money or these other things, and all of those are sort of the enemy to creativity and storytelling.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a solid film. It's not going to waste your time and it's not going to rock your world. But I think it wraps up the second best trilogy in the MCU behind Captain America pretty well, and it is the last decent Disney Marvel film. And no, it doesn't save Disney Marvel. As a matter of fact, the news gets worse. Box office, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 kicks off summer movie season with a $118 million box office debut. Again, that is $28 million behind its predecessor, Guardians 2. Guardians 3, the conclusion of Marvel's trilogy about an extraterrestrial crew of misfits, kicked off with $118 million in its domestic box office debut due to a better-than-expected turnout on Sunday. Monday's final tally was higher than the weekend's estimate of $114 million. Those ticket sales rank as the second biggest opening weekend of the year, behind the Super Mario Bros. Movie with $146 million. Despite the towering figure, the film ever so slightly missed expectations of $120 million and arrived considerably behind its predecessor, which I just mentioned, Guardians 2, which debuted at $146 million in 2017, and I might add, Guardians 3's slightly better than expected estimates from the previously lowered estimates did beat Antifa Man Commie Mania's opening domestic box office by $13 million, but it finished well behind the 3 previous films, all post-COVID era. $69 million behind Doctor Strange Mom, $26 million behind Female Thor, and $63 million behind
Wakanda Forever!
Here Comes the Spin. It's a jump on the first Guardians of the Galaxy, which introduced the world to Chris Pratt's Star-Lord and his friends and opened to $94 million in 2014. So yes, it beat the first film, which came out almost 9 years ago, and we're not adjusting that number for inflation. But at the international box office, Guardians 3 added $168 million from 52 markets, bringing its global tally to $282 million, which is pretty respectable, but still way behind a film that came out just a year ago featuring the Guardians, Thor Love and Thunder, or Female Thor. $30 million behind Thor Love and Thunder to be exact, and that film didn't open up in China, but this one did. In China, which was once a huge territory for Marvel, but has been increasingly hostile towards Hollywood movies, the comic book threequel collected a better than expected $28 million to start. Of that $28 million and everything else they collect in China, Disney only gets 25% if they're lucky. So a semi-decent international box office is going to help the Access Media and Disney cover for what is a total disaster at the domestic box office, which is a surprise to me. I thought Guardians 3 would do way better at the domestic box office. It turns out it's a referendum on everything Disney Marvel has done over the last few years. Tough luck for Disney Marvel, but I don't think Guardians 3 is going to have the same drop-off as Thor Love and Thunder or even Ant-Man. It's got pretty good word of mouth, and it's going to need it to have the legs required for it to become profitable. And now James Gunn is off to DC, and that is the big mystery, but based on what he laid out for his first couple of chapters, I'm not that excited. And based on the last 2 films he's directed, I'm not really sure that pretty good is going to be enough. And as far as Marvel is concerned, they're screwed no matter how well Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does. Up next is the Marvels, and I say bring it on. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
Nerdrotic.com